Thanks everybody for being here. Just in case anyone's hasn't met me, I'm Nathan Urban. I guess as of 7 months now, I don't know if I get to call myself the new provost or just the provost, but in any case, for those of you who haven't participated in one of these before, I've done now, I guess, this is my fourth town hall of this sort, third or fourth. There was, yeah, I think it's the fourth, a town hall of this sort. In part, my goal in them is to meet faculty in from different parts of the university and to foster a discussion around particular topics. We did one on research, we did one on what makes Lehigh Lehigh. There was one where I talked a bit about Lehigh's position, the landscape of higher education and where Lehigh sits in that landscape. Today's topic is diversity and inclusion, and it is something that I'm hopeful, I'm confident that we'll have a interesting and robust discussion about. The way these have worked in the past and the way that I anticipate this working today is that I'm going to give a brief presentation at the beginning, trying to provide a little bit of background, a little bit of information, a little bit of data, and sort of describe a little bit of the, try to frame the discussion a bit. Today, I'm joined by Donald Outing, Vice President for Equity and Community, and Pat Johnson, Vice President for Finance and Administration. And Donald and Pat are my colleagues and collaborators on the anti-racism task force that President Simon asked us to begin to work on, I guess it was late in the summer. And so I'm going, with the structure today is that I'm going to provide a little bit of background, a little bit of data. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the discussions that we've been having. And then I'm going to turn it over to Donald and to Pat to give some remarks about, well, I think Donald will probably talk about an update on strategic planning around diversity and inclusion. And Pat's going to talk about some of the work that's been going on through her activities and her reports in a couple of different domains, both the Lehigh Police and also some other efforts. And then that'll probably take the first half an hour or so. For the last hour, the goal is to have a conversation. Many of you will have submitted questions or comments to the as part of the RSVP that went out. And so in part based on those and in part based on comments and discussion that's raised, I'm hopeful to learn from people in this group about their thinking about these issues of diversity and inclusion on Lehigh's campus. So that's sort of the plan for the next about 90 minutes. So with that, let me jump in. I'm going to share some slides. All right, can everyone see my first slide? Looks like it. Okay. So yeah, as I said, like by other town halls, the main goal is to have a conversation around issues, the topic of diversity and inclusion. For me personally, one important goal is to try and better understand Lehigh, strengths and weaknesses, the current situation as it relates to issues of diversity and inclusion. I will mention briefly some of the plans and discussion around the anti-racism task force that was created over the summer. And I think that may be something that we can come back to. But first, I'm going to talk about some data and some questions that are on my mind, and I think where there's some updates that we can provide in some cases. Questions about recruiting and retention of underrepresented students and faculty on our campus, I think are important ones to discuss and address. And also, I think there's an important set of discussions that are really ongoing about the ways in which we can add to our curriculum, to discussion and information provided to our students around topics of diversity. So with that, let me jump in. So just a brief note about the work of the Anti-Racism Task Force. As I mentioned, it's the task force really consists of, at the request of President Simon, that Donald, Pat, and I began to work on really questions related to how it is that there are policies, how it is that policies at Lehigh might be reviewed and potentially changed, supporting the idea that we want to try and become a more anti-racist university, more anti-racist institution. The task force itself has largely been focused on trying to understand and coordinate the efforts of other groups across the university. So Donald has been working closely with the CEC. There are efforts that are ongoing within the Faculty Senate, discussions of, as I mentioned, potential for requirements for curricular additions around diversity and inclusion, discussions around or questions about our promotion tenure policies and how it is that those we could review those policies as it relates to questions about diversity and inclusion. And there, as I mentioned previously, the Lehigh University Police Department is another place where we're focused. This is sort of the starting point for these discussions. The work is now being coordinated by Kathy Zimmerman, who recently joined the Provost office. And so there will be sort of additional updates and additional information that's provided. But a large part of the work of the group is really trying to coordinate and understand what it is that we are doing across campus and in a variety of ways in a variety of different domains. So I do want to now turn to providing some information about the different certain aspects of diversity on our campus. One of the, for me, one of the starting points for any of these kinds of efforts is to understand where we currently are. In part so that we can ask questions about where we are relative to where we want to be, and then also eventually to be able to track progress and understand what we are doing that works or doesn't work. And so I'm going to present some data, and I would say that one of the things that has been requested of the university a number of times is to try and be more transparent about some of these issues, transparent about the diversity of our populations, so we've pulled together some of this information. Some of this information is already publicly available. Most of that is information about undergraduate students. We haven't in the past compiled and really done much previously looking systematically, at least, at questions about the diversity of our graduate students, of our faculty, of our staff, and we've begun to pull some of that together, and I'll show some of that today. But as I said, we have I would say pretty robust data about our undergraduate populations. In part, this is because some of these are mandated that we collect, compile, and provide. And so just to give you, at a very big picture level, this shows our enrollments of undergraduate students by race or ethnicity over time. And so you can see in recent history, things have been relatively static, relatively flat, without much change in the last 5 years. If we can sort of look back further as well, but just to give you a bit of a snapshot. With respect to gender, we have, unlike most institutions in higher education, we have more men than women. I think in part that represents the distribution of disciplines, the fact that we're engineering centric, or engineering heavy, say. I probably shouldn't say engineering centric, but engineering and STEM heavy, which have disciplines in which there's been historically more men than women. But this is where we are currently, with about 54% men and 46% women. From my perspective, one of the important questions is to ask is the degree to which students from different backgrounds, different groups are successful on our campus. We want to try and promote the success of all our students, and that is something that I think we need to ask ourselves, how we're doing. And so, with respect to one measure of success, a simple measure, is first-year retention. I think it's really important that if we admit students to Lehigh, that we create conditions in which they can be successful. I know there are certainly nationwide concerns about the cost of higher education. I think that there are in many ways important and legitimate concerns about the cost of higher education. I am much more concerned about the cost of higher education for people who don't get a degree than for people who do get a degree. Any degree, but I would say especially, and evidence would say especially a Lehigh degree, has a significant financial return on investment. The average college degree results in $1 million of increased lifetime earning for the recipient over a high school degree or over some college. So a college degree is a worthwhile investment, and a Lehigh degree is even more so. We rank in the top 25 or 30 in terms of long-term return on investment in terms of the value of a degree. But for students who come to college, pay tuition, incur debt in many cases, and don't get a degree, it's not a worthwhile investment. And so I think that looking at the question of degree completion, and that starts by sort of retaining students in the first year, is something that's important. So you can see here our data for first year retention by race and gender. And you can see it's, there's some trends here. There are certainly some fluctuation overall, and as I think is relatively common with looking at first year retention, especially because we don't have for some of these groups, we don't have that many students in those particular categories, and so therefore that can be responsible for some of the fluctuation. But pretty consistent with national trends, our female students retain at a higher rate than our male students. Our white students retain at a higher rate than our Black or Hispanic or Latinx students. I would say that's a general trend, although if you look at the Hispanic numbers here, it's a lot of fluctuation year to year, similar to the Black student numbers as well. If you look a slightly different metric, which is not first year retention, but this is 4 and 6 year graduation rate. It's another domain where I would say, follow national trends in many respects. So our 4 and 6 year graduation rates, and to be clear, if we can just look at this, the dark line here is 4-year graduation rate for male students, or on the right here for female students. The gold line, yellow line is 6-year graduation rates. Women graduate at a higher rate in 4 years, and also at a higher rate in 6 years, although the difference is smaller. If you look at by race and ethnicity, the 4 and 6 year graduation rates, what you see here is domestic minorities graduate in 4 years at about a rate of about 10% lower than our domestic white students. And it's a little closer, a little better if you're looking at the 6 year graduation rate, where it's about a 3% or so difference. But for me, the difference between a 4-year and a 6-year graduation rate is very significant. I mean, it's a 50% increase in potential cost to the student. And so it is, in my view, something that we want to pay attention to and focus on what we can do to ensure that students have a strong chance, a good chance of graduating in 4 years. It's in part, I think, a cost issue, and it's in part an issue of meeting expectations. When people go to college, for the most part, they're expecting that it's a 4-year process, a four-year degree, and I think we want to create an environment where that is the norm, and that is something that we can, while not guarantee, certainly in all cases, that is a strong expectation. We've also begun to compile data, and the numbers here are very small, and so I don't really expect people to look at the left-hand side. but we've been compiling data for some years about outcomes. A couple of different domains, looking at, in this case, we're looking at first destination, what fraction of students are employed or continuing their education or working in volunteering or doing certain set of activities 6 months post graduation. And this is a domain where we do quite well, where Lehigh does quite well in terms of producing good outcomes of this sort for students. We don't do as well for Black or African American students, or in general for students from underrepresented groups, as we do for our white students. And I think, again, this is something to pay attention to. It's also the case that if you look at the combined effects of students who are Pell eligible, so those are students of lower financial means, lower income families, with race, there's a compounding effect there. We have more data about undergrads, happy to show, but I also wanted to provide some data about our populations of graduate students. If you just look at our underrepresented minority graduate students, our Black students represent a little over between 2 and 3, maybe between 2 and 2.5% of our graduate student population over the last few years. Hispanic or Latinx, you can see here a little higher, and with some recent increases as a percentage. But this is data that we've just started to pull together, and Beth Dolan in her sort of work as Deputy Provost of Graduate Education has been working on trying to understand and pull together these data so that we can actually sort of know the answer to these questions about our fraction of different students from different racial ethnic backgrounds. With respect to faculty, again, it's not something we've historically systematically looked at, but we've begun to pull some of these data. This is the distribution of faculty, full-time faculty by gender over the last decade, 2010, 15, and 20. You can see back in 2010 we were a little over 70% male. That number has been shrinking a bit over the last 10 years. If you look at full-time faculty by race and ethnicity, again, we are predominantly white. I think that won't be surprising. That fraction has been decreasing slightly. The fraction of race unknown has increased the most. This is something that's been seen across a number of institutions where more and more people, whether it's faculty, staff, or students, are declining to indicate their race for these kinds of surveys. And so we just don't know who those people are, what the racial or ethnic background of those people in that group are. It's gotten to the point that Stanford actually made a direct appeal for faculty, I believe it was, to sort of volunteer to report their race, because they were getting so many people declining to report their race that they felt like they were having a hard time sort of understanding the distribution and makeup of their faculty. So they've made a push to try and get people to be more willing to volunteer this information so that they can sort of have a better understanding of their faculty. Again, staff, not something we've looked at systematically until very recently. And so our staff is predominantly female, although again, that gap has been shrinking. And our staff is predominantly white. You can see the numbers here. And again, this recent uptick in unknown race or ethnicity. So we are in the process of pulling together, validating, checking this kind of information so that we can do a better job of assessing where we are, so that we can know, what changes have occurred over time if we use this to develop certain kinds of goals or directions, or if we want to try and move the needle on any of these kinds of things, we need to have some baseline data. We need to be able to look at this and see whether some change that we've made may be having an effect. But I would say we have a lot of work to do on pulling together these kinds of data. We have, by far, the strongest data that we have is our undergraduate population data. We need To provide some more details and better breakdowns, we also need to be able to do some benchmarking to understand how it is that we compare to peers. And this will begin to allow us to ask questions about some of our goals and some of our priorities, the things that we want to do, the things that we see as of priorities or opportunities for us. We also, I mean, I think knowing in some sense who's on campus is one thing, knowing about the experience of people on campus is another. And Donald has, and maybe Donald, you can talk a bit more about this if you like, but I just wanted to note that we have recently completed a campus climate survey, and there will be data about the experiences of people on campus that will be available, based on that survey. We're still in the early stages of we just received some of the data and we're beginning to look at it. I think the one slide that I have here has to do with sort of some general questions about how it is, the experience of campus with respect to questions about people's level of satisfaction with campus climate for diversity and equity, and the positive and negative experiences that they've had. The overall sort of data are, that we've looked at so far indicate that we are, comparable to several different peer groups in these metrics, although there's lots more work to do to pull this apart and understand where we are. And I'll maybe stop there. There's a few other slides I can show if issues come up. So that is just a very quick summary of some of the things that we are beginning to look at, sort of a snapshot of what's the campus, what's the current situation on campus with respect to diversity and inclusion, and some of the things that we are beginning to want to look at and pull together and better understand. So with that, maybe I'll turn it over to Donald and then to Pat, if they can give some brief introductory remarks about some of the things that are of greatest interest and importance to them. So Donald.
Okay, thanks Nathan, and thanks for that great overview. And a lot of what you covered will shorten up what I will be talking about. But I will be, of course, happy to go into more detail on any specific issues that people have or questions that people have. So I'm going to start with one of the things that Nathan alluded to, and that was the work that myself, Pat Johnson, and Nathan are doing to continue to lead Lehigh's efforts in developing and implementing impactful and measurable actions for now and in the future. I am currently putting the final touches on a draft 5-year diversity, inclusion, and equity strategic plan that will address stakeholder calls as well as our aspirational desires to provide a more systemic approach to our diversity, inclusion, and equity efforts. Additionally, my office is working in collaboration with university communications and public affairs professionals to develop a strategic communication plan, something that is much needed, so that everyone better understands our DI&E strategic priorities, goals, and efforts as well. We're finding that people are receiving information piecemeal and tend to attribute our diversity, equity, and inclusion work to individual actors within the organization and not understanding that this is a part of a holistic university strategic effort or campaign in some respects. As a first step in our comprehensive review of all university policies and procedures to ensure they're aligned with our DI&E goals, the provost has appointed Kathy Zimmerman as a new special assistant to the provost for strategic and emerging initiatives. One of Kathy's roles will be to work with the newly appointed Lehigh University Police Department Review Advisory Committee that would, as it begins to review LUPD practices, policies, and procedures. the advisory committee comprises a broad section of the university community. This past fall, in support of our efforts to make Lehigh an actively anti-racist university, we engaged our campus community by soliciting proposals from across the entire community via a contest. That contest, titled Creative Ideas to Transform Lehigh into an Anti-Racist Institution, was led by our Deputy Vice President for Equity and Community, Dr. Henry Odie, who was charged to lead an institutional working group, or I should say institutional working groups, that included 52 dedicated faculty, staff, administrators, and undergraduate and graduate students to review submissions. The call for proposal generated 81 submissions, and that resulted in 10 winners sharing honors across 6 different categories. And additionally, you heard that we solicited input from the community on our climate and their perception of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Lehigh, as well as trying to capture workforce experience as well. And Nathan showed the slide that showed that we were comparable to other institutions. However, you know, when you disaggregate some of this and you look gender-wise, racial-wise, sexual orientation-wise, you see that there are disparities in people's perceptions as far as how well we're doing as an organization. But overall, generally, most people are satisfied with the climate here. But you see, like I said, when you break it apart, you see we have work to do as you look at some of the different demographic groups that they don't feel as that the university, we as an organization, are doing as well as we could. In recognition of the universities, and I also want to share that in recognition of all that we've been doing, and this can be attributed to all faculty, staff, and our students and our community, in recognition of all that we've been doing in advancing this more systemic approach to diversity, inclusion, and equity. It inspired Charlie and Ruth Marcon to commit a gift of $2.5 million to establish a research-based effort at Lehigh devoted to research and study that influences perspectives, practices, policies on racial justice. This gift will build on the good work that we're already doing and have done to date. And the main tenet of this gift will be the Marcon Fellows. And the fellows will be Lehigh students that are doing community-based participatory action research, CBPR, in the Lehigh Valley to fight racism and participate in and influence community efforts. This gift is still in its early stages as it was just agreed upon. And so members of the Provost's office, as well as my office, will be working on the operational, the logistical aspects of how this will unfold here at Lehigh. And then finally, I just wanted to share that the National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Education, also known as NADOHE, has appointed me as a member of their task force on creating a framework for advancing anti-racism strategy on campuses. And this will enable Lehigh to have a seat at the table during this national dialogue in designing and implementing best practices around this. And understand that and I know I've shared this with groups before about what we're talking about when we're talking about the framework of anti-racism, where while the focus is on social justice or racial justice, it applies to all structural isms that exist within our academy or the academies. So when I talk about the framework of anti-racism, understand that we are applying this principle, this framework, to assess practices, policies, and procedures as they pertain to a broad variety of aspects of isms that exist within the academies. So with that, that concludes my remarks, and I will hand it off to Pat Johnson.
Thank you, Donald. Thank you, Nathan. I'm going to just talk a little bit about what we already are doing. It's interesting that I think some of the things that Donald and Nathan spoke about, like communication. So there's a lot of things that we're doing that no one knew we were doing that's out there. And one example is that even preceding me, I've been here 7 years, my STEM had a D&I committee, and so do many other STEMs and many other departments, and they all have policies related to that. So it's not new that we're doing that. We're just trying to coordinate that effort and making sure that we're all headed in the same direction. So I do want to, we also, Nathan and Donald also spoke about the LUPD Review Committee. That effort is led by Chad Williams, of the Director of Multicultural Affairs. But we're also using a research center that was founded at UCLA called the Center for Policing Equity. They measure bias in policing. So we're using their expertise to help us with that review. The other thing we're doing, there is a mandatory training for all staff members called Cornerstone of Community that has 6 offerings in it now. It's a suite of diversity and inclusion sessions. Many of you already know about some of those things that we've done using visions, power play, site. We have already had those groups on campus and been providing training. We're now just saying that it will be mandatory. There's certain types of training that we expect our supervisors to have, and we will include that as part of their performance evaluation when we do that. We, part of our community outreach back again, long before I got here, 2013, we actually gave $250,000 to Rising Tide. That is a loan fund that is managed through CACLV, the Community Action Committee of Lehigh Valley. That loan fund actually gave out 7 loans, 3 to Bethlehem businesses, including, and this is all small businesses, a bodega, a salon, a home-based quilting business. And because the demand's not there, it's kind of interesting. We had a student come to talk to us about this, where she wanted to target only African-American businesses in South Bethlehem. As many of you know, that's not the minority in South Bethlehem, is Hispanic. So when you start limiting your funds that way, you don't get to use them. So this fund actually went outside of Bethlehem because they had a need, and it funded a nursing school, a minority-owned inner city childcare center, and a minority-owned restaurant and a gym. So that's been since 2013. We also administered the revolving loan fund for, which was a collaboration of the counties and the city of Bethlehem and Lehigh through the Small Business Development Corporation. We had been doing that for a while, but we just turned that over to the Rising Tide as well. So they will have more funds to get that money out into the communities. They had a visibility that I think we didn't have, meaning that group didn't have. It was made up, this group was made up of bankers mainly. So we think that that will be a much more positive effect on the community in doing that. The last thing I probably want to bring up is that as part of our 2030 sustainability plan, we do have culture and engagement goals, and some of those I'm just going to read to you because those is 3 goals within that in the plan, and one is to create and sustain a campus culture that acknowledges and celebrates diversity, fosters inclusive excellence, and is committed to being anti-racist. Another is to create and sustain an institutional infrastructure that effectively supports progress in achieving its diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. And probably the last that I'll talk about is to attract, recruit, hire, and retain a high quality and diverse faculty and staff dedicated to student development, professional excellence, continuing growth and diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racist practices and principles. So those are things that we have already done. So I'll turn it over. That's the last of my remarks, and I'll turn it over and see if there's any questions for all of us.
So if I can just maybe jump in and then we'll sort of open up to the questions. I think Jackie's going to sort of help to manage those. I wanted to just speak for a few minutes about, so we talked a bit about the current sort of landscape and also a bit about some of the things that are ongoing. I wanted to spend a minute or so just talking about some of the really the why question. Well, why is this important? Which I think, I mean, in some ways, maybe a lot of this goes unsaid, but I would say, for me, in thinking about this, I think there are two important aspects of this. Sometimes we focus on one, sometimes we focus on the other, but I think both are important. One is that from the standpoint of doing, in what I would say is, what's right, that providing the kinds of opportunities for people regardless of race or gender is something that is, in my view, an important value that the university has to have. We want to be in a position to create opportunities for people, and it is right and appropriate that we do that in a way that is fair and equitable. And so we want to do, in that sense, what's right. But I also think that it's important to keep in mind that we are also a better university when we are a more diverse place. There's plenty of evidence showing that whether you're talking about educational environments where groups of people are trying to solve really tough problems, or whether you're talking about publications that have the greatest impact, whether you're talking about educational environments that really do the best job of promoting learning for all the individuals who are engaged. That diversity is an important component to the best educational environments. I really like some of the work of Scott Page at the University of Michigan on this topic, but there are many people who have worked in this area. And so I think that it's a good situation when the right thing to do is also the best thing to do to promote the mission of the university. And I feel like there's, in this space, there's really good alignment between doing both of these things, or doing these things for both of those reasons simultaneously. And so that is something that I think that we want to keep in mind as we're looking at these kinds of data, as we're thinking about the kinds of actions that we might want to take, thinking about both aspects of this in terms of the why question. Why is it that we're trying to do this? What are we trying to achieve? I think those are important things to keep in mind. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Jackie to help sort of moderate, or at least start the moderation of some of the questions that have already been asked, and there'll be certainly opportunities to ask questions here as well. Jackie?
This two ways. So you can put a question in the chat, or you can raise your hand and I'll try to get to you that way. If I miss you, I apologize. You can private chat me if I really skip over you. So let me just check and see who's up here. Kevin, it looks like you have your hand up.
Yep, thank you. I'm sure everyone would agree here that there are lots of different perspectives on anti-racism, and that there's more than one way to be anti-racist. And in fact, there is a great deal of disagreement within our society as to what constitutes being anti-racist. There are some people, and I would venture to say that this is the common view within lefty academia, would say that it's about getting everyone to increase the salience of race, right? To focus on race, to say that we need to break things down by categories, as in Nathan's excellent presentation. But there is another perspective on that, which says that following from Barbara and Elizabeth Field's work on racecraft, and from Martin Luther King's vision of the civil rights movement, that the other way is to downplay the salience of race. That we should, when we are concerned about, say, differential graduation rates and differential retention rates, we should be focusing on things like, we should be focusing on the fact that these are multifactorial things, that these things have a lot to do with things other than race, such as socioeconomic status, there may be very different kinds of programs that people on that side of things would support. And since I get the impression that the university is pursuing this in very much the former way, it has a strong politicization to it, right? the Lehigh has taken a specifically leftist political view on what anti-racism means. I find that troubling, and I hope I can get comment from you folks on that.
Yeah.
So my colleagues may want to also comment, but let me just start off. So I would say, just to take the specific example you mentioned, say differential graduation rates by race, I see this as a signal of something. I see this as an indication that there is a concern. I think graduation rates, I would like to see increases in graduation rates, full stop. I would like to see that be something that would be, across the board. I think that the fact that we have a differential graduation rate based on race, also one based on gender, is something that indicates to me something about a problem that we should be, working to solve. I don't presuppose the nature of that problem, the fundamental sort of basis of it. It certainly may have to do with economic means. It may have to do with sort of the climate that different people experience. It may have to do with the differential expectations. There are a whole variety of things. But I do think that for me, that is the starting point, is not the place that it ends. I do think that certainly there's a lot of discussion around the term anti-racism and what it means and what it doesn't mean. I'm not personally, particularly sort of deeply sort of interested in having that discussion about what exactly it means. I know it sort of has been polarizing and politicizing. But to me, the most important thing is to recognize that when we're talking about these issues, I think it's important to get beyond the question of what I would call sort of racial animus. It's not the question of whether people like people or don't like people of other races. The question is practically what obstacles or barriers do we see in our environment that prevent people from being, in the case of an academic institution, successful by means of things like graduation rates, et cetera. Donald, you looked like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I think you covered things well there, Nathan, but I'll just add one comment about the politicization of some of this work. If you look at over time, historically, every action that groups have taken to promote equity, whether it's around gender, race, sexual orientation, it has been politicized, not by the groups that we're advocating for, but by those who have co-opted some of this in a way to continue to promote divide and encourage I'll say non-constructive discourse around this. If we stay out of the political framework and just stay in the humanistic framework, you understand this work is still very important. Whether you go back to affirmative action or you talk about anti-racism today, there's always been this narrative, this effort to try to politicize this. Even calling it a left or right agenda politicizes it. And it is not about left or right. It's about humanity. It's about, for those of us who do this work as practitioners, it's about doing what's right for the benefit of all of us. And also I'll say that when we shifted focus from race to other aspects of equity, what we saw, because there was a period of time we did engage in this for a long period of time, and there's been many structures and organizations that have published some of their results, to include the military, the armed forces for one. When we shifted focus from that, we did see disparities among race grow, as a matter of fact. Many scholars believe that because no matter what type of intersectionality you look at, there's huge disparities within that intersection as it pertains to race. So the underlying focus for many has been to address a lot of the inequities in race, as many of the scholars have promoted this idea, and it is one that I subscribe to, that addressing and attacking that, as well as the intersection of race and other isms, we can successfully address the problems of inequity that continue to plague us.
I'm sorry, but if I can respond very briefly, there is not a critical theorist alive who would not respond to that kind of argument respectfully. Saying that what we're doing is apolitical and what the other side is doing is political is no. Both sides are political.
So I'm not using a we or they. I'm saying practitioners. I'm talking about myself as a practitioner. We stay out of the political fray. I'm not saying one side is right or wrong, because I stay out of that political fray. And I'm saying the work that we do is not about politicizing this. I'm saying all of these efforts have been co-opted and politicized by other groups, whether you're talking about right, left, Democrat, Republicans. I'm saying they've been politicized. So I'm not talking the we, they. I'm talking about practitioners who do this work. We try to stay out of the political framework when we do our work.
I'm sorry, but the idea that diversity administrators' work has no political foundation or biases to it, to me, is absurd.
I see another hand up. Mike Lemon.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. Nathan, I appreciated your comment and data related to support staff at the university. And an observation, whether we look at the data or simply, observation, ethnographic research, support staff across universities is typically fairly homogeneous. And anecdotally, I've seen at Pitt, where I was before, and at Lehigh, where you've had some diversity, even if it's a male support staff in the office or younger, older, different experiences, the conversations that the students have kind of broaden. So I just, applaud the fact that we're looking not only at faculty and administration from that perspective, but that support staff is the first line that our students interact with, probably more than any of the other groups. So in an area of focus that I think deserves more attention.
Great, thanks, Mike. Yeah, no, I mean, I would say I should have probably already given some thanks to Jenny Anderson and her team from Office of Institutional Research and Strategic Analytics, who was the one sort of pulling these data together. As I mentioned, these are not things that we've historically necessarily had an easy ability to track or generate reports on, and so we're in the process of doing that. There's some work that Jackie has begun through something. There's a national group that's called the Aspire iChange Network, which is looking at diversity of faculty in STEM disciplines in particular. And again, the step one of that process, it's a sort of 3-year process that we're embarking on. Step one of that process is sort of assessment, and we need to make sure that we have the kinds of data of both current and historical about faculty, in that case, about staff in other cases, so that we can ask the question, so that we can understand what our current circumstance is, so that we can, because all the next steps will depend on what the data look like. So, but yeah, it's a critical initial step in this process.
Jackie, are you muted?
Can you hear me now? Okay. I don't see any other hands up, but I know one of the questions that we got ahead of time, or one of the comments, had to do with ideas about implementations in the curriculum to this effect. And I know for some of us who've been here for a while, this has been sort of an ongoing conversation. So I thought maybe that would be good to hear some ideas on that.
And I know that Ed Paul has been discussing this, as have associate deans in the various colleges. So I'd be curious to get a perspective from people who've been involved in some of those discussions, if they would like.
Frank?
In a failure of democracy, I'm the chair of Ed Paul. We've been looking for a couple meetings at the idea of having a required course or courses among the approximately 60 courses that are currently taught at Lehigh that look at issues of race, gender, religion, law, etc. what we discovered during this discussion is that many departments and colleges are already engaged in activities. And so one of the things we're going to do over the next 2 meetings is each of the colleges is going to discuss what is currently being done by departments and by the college. Thank you.
Katrina, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to share. I'll just extend what Frank's saying, since you won't all be in EdPol at our next meeting where the associate deans will share. I'm Katrina Salatan, and I'm the associate dean for undergrads in the College of Business. And I can say that we have our existing diversity requirement that's been around since, I think it started in 2008, where a lot of our colleagues in arts and sciences have partnered with us to offer courses that meet a definition that was defined then. I know I'm working, had conversation with Susan Sispansky about redoing a review. We haven't done a review of the courses in about 6 years. And our college policy committee is revisiting our definition of what is a diversity course. I know a lot of our colleagues in arts and sciences, the last time we worked with department chairs to do a review, had a lot of questions and comments about our thinking. And so our college policy committee is doing a refresh and thinking about that now. And we're in conversation with your associate deans to talk about that process. We also have a 3-credit that's for the 3-credit diversity requirement. Our college has also recently added a learning objective related to diversity and its impact on business outcomes and decisions. And that learning objective is being mapped to courses within our college in our core curriculum. And we're really delighted that half of our departments have engaged in committing to not only teaching relative to diversity in their courses, but also to assess them, which is a rather large commitment. So we appreciate that.
So one thing I would say is that in talking to students about the general issue of diversity and sort of just about their Lehigh experience overall, the frequency with which the idea that Lehigh should have some kind of academic requirement that provides students with information about how to sort of a diversity requirement is often the way it's stated. And I think when you ask more details as to what it is students are looking for, in many cases, they're looking for something that helps them sort of understand the current status and history of diversity in the US or in a global context. And also that they're looking for opportunities that will help them be more successful in a world in which they're going to have to work with people from many, many diverse backgrounds. And so that second, I think of as almost a skill-based approach to what it is that students are looking for, which I think is actually quite an interesting observation on the part of students. And so again, this comes up very, very frequently, both in the academic context, sort of 4-credit courses, but also in a student affairs context where students are looking for information about how and sort of guidance and training about how to have conversations with in diverse groups or in diverse environments, potentially conversations about controversial or challenging or potentially polarizing issues. So that's something that keeps coming up in conversations with students.
Jody, do you want to jump in real quick before you have to go? I saw your comment. If not, I can read the comment.
I really, I'm juggling too many things this morning. I just wanted to say I'm happy to be in further conversation. I think when we talk about seats and departmental resources, I think a lot of humanities and social sciences departments are doing this work with students from other colleges. So it's all in my comment. And yeah, thank you all for having this conversation. Sorry, I'm not more present.
No, thank you, Jody. Thanks for saying that.
Bye.
Okay, so are there other hands up? Katrina, your hand is still up. Let's see. So there's a question that came through in the comments we collected ahead of time about something to the effect, beyond demographics, what are some of the structural obstacles to creating inclusive and equitable environment for people? And different folks had different ideas that they wrote in their comments to us ahead of time.
I mean, one structural obstacle that I'll mention that I feel like I have some thoughts, but I think there's not a great way to deal with is that given where we're starting, given that we are not, a particularly diverse place, and given in many cases the goals of having a diverse group of people sort of involved in a discussion or involved in a decision-making body that may be related to a particular issue, I'll raise promotion tenure decisions here. Promotion tenure is a critical process for faculty. It is something that if I were coming out for a promotion or tenure and the committee, I felt like the committee in some sense had no people in that committee that looked like me or that had shared experience with me, that would be something that would worry me. That I would wonder whether that committee could appreciate the challenges or the issues or the work that I had done in the same way as a committee that was had more shared experience with me. And so our tendency then is to try and populate committees disproportional to the group of faculty. So if we try to add more women to a committee, even if we don't have that many women in a particular department, or more people of color to a committee, to try and create representation on that committee of different groups. One of the consequences of that is that it puts a disproportionate burden, service burden on people. That in some measures can have an opposite effect to the one that we might have hoped, which would be to promote diversity and to help us retain and advance the careers of people from diverse backgrounds. And so, this is something that I think comes up again and again when thinking about these kinds of issues and how to begin to make sure that we have the kind of representation in different groups and different committees across the university without placing this undue burden on people. I would say especially women and people of color. And I'm curious as to people's thoughts about that and solutions that people might have seen working in other places.
I know there's some of us who are slated for a workshop actually later today on disrupting disparities in academic workload. So hopefully we'll get some really good ideas from that. There are some places that are working very hard on this, so we can sort of borrow some of those. But I'm curious what if other folks have ideas from what they've observed here.
Can I just jump in and say something? I have to run to a 10 o'clock as
Sure.
well. I just want to go back a little bit to what was stated previously by the provost. I was lucky enough to take Dr. Outing's course on courageous inclusion. I'm an instructional staff. I teach stage management for theater in the theater department. We're grappling with our own anti-racism issues over there due to the We See You White American Theater document that was published last summer nationwide. And I have taken every anti-racism course since then. I've taken many previous to that. And I took a really brave step, I feel, in my advanced stage management class this semester by including anti-racism conversations in the classroom. And so far, my students have been really on board with this conversation. And for me, the difference between just talking about it in a group like this and actually doing it in my classroom has been being willing to walk toward that discomfort and being willing to be open with my students that is how we're going to have to approach this conversation, because it is uncomfortable. But in order to prepare them to be stage managers in a world where we have to start thinking in anti-racist policy and anti-racist thinking and develop those conversations in the classroom so that they can take it out into the workforce, whether they go into computer science or they go into theater or they go into engineering or whatever. It's my hope that through that, through that walking into the unknown, kind of jumping off the edge, will help them. And it's certainly helped me. So that was in response to something that the provost said two moments ago, but I got to jump off to my other meeting. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you. David Casagrande, since we're just on curriculum, let's go back to you for a second.
Sorry, I just put a comment in. So I made a comment in the chat about how it's a great idea to have a diversity curriculum, but it does put a burden on specific disciplines that tend to focus their research on diversity. So an example is sociology. And so there's only so many seats of sociology classes that we can offer. I'm just pointing out that if we're going to do that and be filling up those classes, then that should be reflected in hiring policies of the higher administration.
Frank, I think you had yours. You had a note.
Oh, thank you. Something that the provost said, and I immediately leaped to find out what the numbers are. Looking at the male-female ratio among undergraduates at Lehigh, 20 years ago, most college students were male, 60 to roughly 60% male, 40% female. But that has changed dramatically. Looking at the most recent data, colleges across America are 57% female, 43% male. And there seems to be a big debate about whether it's a reflection of men don't want to go to college anymore, they have better financial or economic opportunities elsewhere, or whether colleges and universities have intentionally or unintentionally created a hostile environment for young men. Lehigh, having more males than females, aren't we providing access to the university for a group that seems to be increasingly underserved? Shouldn't this be something that is considered a success of Lehigh, not a problem we should be working on? Thank you.
It's an interesting point, Frank. I would say a couple different things about this, and I think it's important that we start any kind of conversation along these lines, based on what our goals are. One question is if the college student population is disproportionately female and we're disproportionately male, are we missing opportunities to recruit from the population of students who are applying to college? I think that's one question. I think there's a sort of a pipeline question. Are there things that are happening in high schools that lead men to be less likely to go to college? And just at least, this is not, I don't have firm data on this, but from a number of institutions across the country, the fraction of women applicants has gone up significantly this year, even above the numbers that you've quoted. And the perception is that this is a COVID effect, although I don't think anybody really knows. But 3 to 5% increases in the fraction of women applying to colleges and universities as undergraduates is what a number of institutions have reported this year. I don't think we're quite there, but it's in that ballpark. I think our applicants this year are closer to 50-50 than they've ever been. And I think it may be this sort of effective this year. So I think it's a question that we should think about. What goals are we trying to achieve in this? And I see this both on the applicant side and also on the graduation rate side. Stony Brook actually has done some work in this area where they've looked at especially men from poorer, lower family income backgrounds who have at Stony Brook, they've historically graduated at a much lower rate, and they've looked at what programs they can create to foster this a higher graduation rate among this population. So I think that those are important questions to look at, and to really start from the question of what are the goals that we're trying to achieve educationally, in terms of mirroring the if you will, the demand for higher education. That's something that we want to we may want to look at, but also how it is that we're serving the students who come here, because as I indicated, I think that ensuring that people have a high probability path to getting a degree is something that's very important and that we have a responsibility to do, especially as an expensive private institution.
Armin, I think that you're next.
Also, Jackie, I see Katrina's hand has been up for some time.
I texted Katrina to see if it was up from before. I didn't. Katrina, are you still here?
Yeah, it was up from before. My apologies. I will take it down.
Okay, thanks.
If I could.
You have lots of people making sure that you got to speak. Armin, go ahead, it's to you.
Okay, thank you. So it has been quite some time now that not only on our campus, but in many campuses across the country, it has become commonplace to respond to empirical claims with accusations of racism, sexism, homophobia, etc. So it's not that these claims are wrong simply, but often the mere disagreement with factual statements takes this form, unfortunately. And I think that is quite dangerous for the intellectual climate of universities. But we have done one better already on American campuses. We have succeeded in politicizing not just empirical claims, but also methodology. And I think being merely a positivist and thinking that objective knowledge or objective knowledge is possible, or epistemological relativism is an incoherent philosophy, puts you in some kind of danger. And I'm saying that because the thing that is most closely associated with anti-racist attitude or anti-racist policy is critical race theory, which is firmly rooted in that kind of an epistemology. So my question is, would I be contributing to bad climate on campus if I tell my students as much? If I tell them that this is rooted in an incoherent epistemology, that relativism is incoherent, and anything based in it, anything rooted in it, is incoherent. I have another example there, which is not about epistemology, but if somebody were to agree with Adolf Reed's argument that identity politics, this is more of an empirical claim, that identity politics sort of blunts the creation of wider progressive coalitions rooted in or based on class, would they be taking a stance that is inconsistent with anti-racism, or would they be contributing to a bad climate by simply making such an argument? Thank you very much.
So I can try and take that. I don't know Adolf Reed's argument that you're referring to specifically, but I think the general point that if a faculty member were to make an argument that along the lines of what you've described, that identity politics makes it difficult to organize a progressive coalition centered around class discrimination, that seems like, I don't know what argument would be made specifically, but it seems like there certainly could be arguments of that sort that would be, sort of intellectually, legitimate and interesting to make. I don't have any, that doesn't strike me as something that is in any way beyond the bounds of something that we should be discussing with students. I think that there, again, I don't know the area, but I assume that there are arguments on multiple sides of that particular issue, and I think that those are perspectives that we would be we should be discussing and sharing with students.
I'll just add 2 cents from sociology. I don't want to take up a lot of time here, just to say that there's actually a lot of really robust debates within sociology from various methodological perspectives that sort of take up these things and the tension. So I think there's really healthy academic debates around this, at least in my own field. So I often tend to teach the debates in what I do. Let's see, check my comments. Is there anyone who wants to talk who hasn't had a chance yet? No, okay, Kevin, back to you then.
Thank you. If I could sort of follow up on Armand's point and take it in a slightly different direction. where, you know, the original point that people are taking arguments that they disagree with and accusing them of racism or being rooted in racism. I'm sure what's on a lot of our minds, particularly mine, is the actions of the Faculty Senate yesterday, which was to denounce, in no uncertain terms, a perfectly banal center-right argument made by one of our most prominent faculty members for you know, not including a counter argument to his claim. I find this to be a profound attack on academic freedom. That now, you know, not only are we using our individual rights, or certainly each of us individually has the right to say, yes, an argument is rooted in structural racism or something like that, but for an administrative body, and even worse here, the you know, elected representatives of the faculty to be descending down and surveilling the individual behavior of individual faculty members in their day-to-day business, and to be condemning them on the basis that their argument is not politically correct, seems to me to be deeply dangerous. And I would very much appreciate hearing Nathan's thoughts on this.
So, so I guess my view on Faculty Senate's sort of interest and sort of willingness or whatever to do this is that Faculty Senate is an elected body that can choose to voice opinions about a wide range of issues, and they chose to you know, voice an opinion on this particular issue. I don't, if there's, you know, concern about Faculty Senate doing that, I assume that that could be expressed to Faculty Senate. You know, people could be voted in or out of Faculty Senate on the basis of that if it was something that was of significant enough concern to a broad section of the faculty. I don't have any particular you know, concern or viewpoint on whether that is something that Faculty Senate should you know, choose to be, you know, engaged in or involved in, as opposed to other issues that Faculty Senate may take up. At other institutions where I've been, Faculty Senates have been very different in terms of what they saw as the scope of their activity and the range of things on which they would choose to comment. Some would choose to comment on, you know, political issues outside of the university. You know, others were much more circumspect and focused on issues of university policy only, and didn't really venture into these areas. I feel like any body of faculty that wanted to raise, you know, to express opinions. I mean, Kevin, I think you indicated that you thought it would be certainly fine for any individual faculty member to critique an argument that was made. I feel like if a group of faculty chooses to do so, then that's really, you know, up to them, and that Faculty Senate, you know, as functioning as such a group, especially given that Faculty Senate doesn't you know, oversee promotion, tenure, raises, doesn't have that kind of you know, authority over individual faculty. I don't personally have a significant, you know, problem with Faculty Senate choosing to do that. I would be interested in arguments as to why it is that faculty, probably not in a different setting, but what, you know, whether that should or shouldn't be within the purview, within the domain of what Faculty Senate, you know, typically does. But I don't a priori have a you know, a significant concern about Faculty Senate choosing to do such things. In fact, Faculty Senate here is relatively new. Yeah. So I think,
would you assure us that the provost office won't be intervening in this issue in the way that the Faculty Senate did?
I will say, as you know, I haven't intervened up to this point. That's what I can say at this point.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? One of the comments I think that or we asked folks to comment on in the survey was about faculty development opportunities. So if there were those kinds of things that folks were looking for that they didn't have, or ones in particular that they did have that they thought were a good experience, if folks would share those.
I have a question, but I can't use my raise hand function.
Oh, okay, Julie, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, in response to Armin's questions or observations, it seems like sometimes when you use certain words, it kind of triggers a whole historical lineage that could be problematic for, the people who are, trying to do some work that's really not related to that lineage. I just wondered if there was a different way that this idea of what we're trying to build a culture of inclusion, would better serve what the goal is, instead of using this seemingly divisive anti-racism language.
Yeah, I mean, the topic of today was, as described and as advertised, was diversity and inclusion. The work of the task force that has been put together, which John Simon sort of tasked us with, was specifically focused on race and specifically focused on anti-racism. I mean, you could talk to, we can talk about sort of what the intent of that term in this case was, but I think the focus really is to think about ways in which the policy of the university, and in that sense, the structures that we have in place, either promote or do not promote diversity and inclusion, and the success of people regardless of race, racial or ethnic background. And so that is the focus of my thinking about what this task force is supposed to do, recognizing and differentiating from the idea that it should be focused on people's attitudes about race. That's something that I think is historically has been one of the ways in which people have thought about what it means, what racism means, or what it means to be racist. I think the focus of this particular work of this group is really policy and structural issues that influence how the success of groups of faculty, staff, and students that may be influenced by race.
But there are a lot of other ways in which people can feel that they're not included. It could be, a disability, or, just a religious belief, or, political belief, or, many different ways in which people could just feel, excluded.
Absolutely, and I think that the broad focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion is intended to capture sort of all of these different issues, whether it's race or gender or disability, et cetera. The task force that the president sort of created over the course of the summer was in response very specifically to the killing of George Floyd and some of the issues and concerns that arose after that. That's the task force is not the only activity, or it's certainly not the only activity that relates to the broad questions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are many issues and many topics and many activities which are going on which extend beyond the work of the task force. And some of these address some of the issues that you've raised, Julie. So thanks for your comment.
Yeah, and I just want to echo that narrative, and that the work that we've been doing continues. It has not, we have not stopped our focus on working on issues or matters of access, on other matters of inequities that exist. The approach that we have taken towards addressing these matters has shifted somewhat from the standpoint of going beyond just education and awareness, but to a more proactive effort of looking at what policies, processes, and procedures that we may have in place that inhibit equitable access for able-bodied or those who require, or for those who have hidden disabilities, or those who come from that have different genders, or who are non-binary. Our work continues to focus, and we have a whole team of people that focus on that work and that effort. It's the approach, the idea of addressing structures that may exist, process, procedures, where we shift. And I understand people's concern about language. We're always trying to choose the appropriate language. And if you look at over time, we have shifted our language time and time again because of the triggering effect. At one time, just the word diversity or diversity training was a trigger for many groups and individuals. And so we're always combating that. But in the end, what we're trying to do is do the work of providing a more equitable community and to create a more inclusive environment. That's the underlying principle of all of this. And that's for all.
Yeah, if I can maybe add a little bit. So when I think about what for me has been over the last few years a transition in my thinking about some of these issues, I have participated at different times and even sort of run programs that have tried to promote, for example, women in STEM, or Black students in STEM disciplines, or et cetera. I mean, sort of diversity programs of that sort. And some of them I think have been successful in broadening participation and in a variety of different ways. One of the things that I've observed, and I think that actually is a sort of a realization that many people have come to, is that those programs, while they can achieve certain goals, if the program stops, then things tend to revert back to the way that they were, and that there's not a persistence to them that is created by bringing in 8 or 10 students per year to participate in some kind of program, or to have et cetera. And so the question of how to get a persistent change, how to create an environment in which this there's a greater degree of equity that outlasts even the particular focused effort, is one that I think has become, in my mind, quite important. And so that's where looking at questions about policy, questions about structure, I think become important, because those are situations where if you can make certain changes, then the effect can outlast any focused ongoing effort. And so as an example here, I think if you look at admissions criteria, and you an example that I sort of was directly involved with at a previous institution, the use of GREs in graduate school admission, PhD program admission. GREs are poor predictors of success in graduate school by almost every metric. It's very clear that GREs, good GRE scores don't correlate with success in graduate school. Good GRE scores do correlate with race. And so if you are using GRE scores in graduate school admission, you're not increasing the success or your likelihood of identifying students who are going to be successful in your program, but you are increasing your likelihood of admitting white students. That is not something that that's something that by changing it, you can have a long-term, long-lasting effect on the access of students, especially students of color, or in some cases to women, to that program. that's a structural change. That's a policy change that can have this long-term lasting effect, rather than creating a program that reaches out to women or students of color and tries to recruit them specifically into your program, where once that program, if that program ends, the effect goes away. So to me, that's the difference that is important to capture in terms of the way that we're thinking about these particular issues going forward.
Nathan, I just want to add to that and say that, you know, from a policy perspective, when I think of faculty and all those sorts of things, you know, when we work on policies and we create best practices, these are best practices that are just really, really good practices, right? And so it's often sort of poor practices that promote more unequal outcomes. And so when I'm thinking of this workshop I'm attending this afternoon, it's not, we know that we have workloads that are not distributed evenly by race or gender. And so working on methods by which we understand faculty workloads, how they get distributed and whatnot, will ultimately help, I think, the whole institution. But the byproduct of that is that we don't replicate the same dynamic by which we have, you know, the groups that we know are working very hard on these issues that are the only ones doing those and sort of not getting credit for it. So I think that if you're doing good policy, that outcome ultimately benefits everyone. Dimitrios, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I just typed what I had to say. So
okay, take a second to read it. I don't see any other hands up at the moment.
So Kevin, to your point, SAT scores are correlated with success in college. GRE scores are not correlated with success in graduate school. So I do think there's a difference between SAT scores and GRE scores in that particular content.
My understanding is that the studies that have drawn that conclusion on GREs are based on studies of differences of GRE students, of GRE scores of admitted students. So there's a big selection bias with those studies.
True for some and not for others, but
okay.
happy to talk more.
Thank you.
Looks like we're almost out of time.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I've really sort of appreciated the comments and the conversation. You know, clearly there's more to discuss and more work to do. But I really appreciate people sort of being here and raising what I think are really important and critical issues. Also wanted to thank Jackie and Kathy and Jill and other people in the Provost's office, as well as Donald and Pat for participating today. I really appreciate everyone's time and contributions.
Thank you, Nathan.
Thanks.